Hey, it's Concrete. This is video number 7 in my Flavorah beta testing video. So this would be flavors 18 through 21. We've been doing quite a few of these, but that's okay. The end's in sight. There's going to be 2 more of these, and I'll switch to other flavoring brands. Standard disclaimer I've been rolling with applies. I didn't pay for these, but that's okay. You came to watch a strange-looking man vape on camera, so let's get to it. Today I have their Nectarine, their Hazelnut, and their Granola flavors. So, starting off on their Nectarine, I have it mixed here at 2%. So, right off the bat here, this is a really nice flavor. They do the nectarine thing fairly well. It's a sort of like a cross between a white peach, but it's a little bit brighter. It almost has like a orangish citrus kind of edge to it. It tastes a lot like something like Flavor Art's white peach, but just even a little bit brighter than that. In terms of body and mouthfeel, this is a little dry. For me, I almost get like a peel note there. There doesn't really seem to be anything too fleshy or juicy. With sort of peach-ish flavors, generally the juicier it is, the closer it kind of hews to something like a peach ring flavor. So don't get any of that in here, which is good. I do get some pretty intense throat hit, which again, throat hit ends up being fairly personal for people. How much of that they want to deal with. People swear by like TPA's Juicy Peach and Flavor Art's White Peach and stuff, even though those also have a pretty substantial throat hit. But this one definitely punches a little bit. There's something that just kind of kicks me right in the throat in this. And then I do pick up some off flavors, and like my standard disclaimer for off flavors is, you might not mind them, or B, have them stick out nearly as much. But for me, this definitely has some of the off flavors that I kind of associate with cherry flavors more than anything else. Like they have that kind of sort of plasticky chemical harshness to them. And, for me personally, that kind of off flavor sort of ruins concentrates for me. I do get some of those in here. I don't think it's like quite as weird as a lot of cherry flavors get, but there's definitely sort of that sort of cherry off flavor edge in there. So I guess my disclaimer would be, if you can vape most cherry flavors and they don't really strike you as weird, I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue here. But for me, who spends a lot of time obsessing about like cherry off flavors, that sort of chemical plastic kind of hit to this is kind of a bummer. In terms of strength, it's kind of a tricky one for me just because of those off flavors that I get. I feel like the off flavors are less pronounced, under about 1%. The flavor isn't quite as bright and vibrant, but on the sort of flip side of that, it doesn't have quite the amount of dryness and the amount of harshness there. So for me personally, I'd probably be down under 1%, maybe using it as an accent in like the 0.25%, 0.5% range. But again, if you're cool with throat hit and those kind of cherry off flavors don't bother you, then, you could go quite a bit higher. The actual nectarine flavor here is really nice. The bottle smells incredible, and for what it's worth, the room note on it is really great too. But yeah, I get too much throat hit and too many off flavors up much higher than that. If you were going to be using this, it is like a nice bright fruit flavor, and I'd kind of pair it with other interesting bright fruit flavors. I think you could add some extra dimension to like a flatter, sweeter peach, like more of a yellow peach flavor. I think this could bring in some really interesting brightness on top of that. I do think it'd go well with like mangoes and pineapples and that kind of tropical stuff. I think in mixing it with some other fruits, you'd look for some ways to kind of get some of that throat hit under control. So strawberry flavors generally have a lot of maltol in them, and they work a lot like straight ethyl maltol in terms of like controlling throat hit. So I think like mixing this with one of the TPA strawberries would be a really smart move. It's going to go ahead and rein in that throat hit a little bit. and the actual flavor itself is going to go really well. And again, if you want to work on that throat hit, there's the old tricks. There's marshmallows. Uh, there's creams, especially something like heavy in triacetin, like TPA's whipped cream would be an awesome one to kind of round the edges off that. You're going to get a little bit of selective muting, but it will make it much less throaty. But yeah, it's an interesting bright fruit flavor, fairly potent, and it's a pretty solid nectarine, but it's a little on the dry side for me, and I think those off notes and that throat hit kind of get to me a little bit. I'm not sure it's really for me. Next, I have their hazelnut flavor. And what do you know? Does in fact taste like a hazelnut. I'd call it closer to the raw side of hazelnuts. It isn't necessarily like a bakery hazelnut for me, and it's certainly not like a creamier hazelnut like Flavor West's hazelnut. For me, I'd call it a little bit closer to Flavor Art's Hazel Grove, which also has that kind of raw hazelnut edge to it. Although I do get a little bit more like discreet nuttiness out of Flavor Art's flavor than this. There is like a smoother hazelnut base flavor here with just a little bit of nuttiness, like a little bit of like a roasted hazelnut vibe. But I feel like there's a pretty aggressive like green hazelnut skin flavor. And for me, at least, that's kind of like what's limiting me in terms of concentration. This does feel very, very potent. Like 0.25, maybe 0.5, but honestly, it's going to work out a lot better if you go ahead and use it a little bit lower. I think it's going to add more to your mixes. This is probably a dilution flavor for me, so I'll go ahead and mix it up at a 10% dilution so I have a little bit more fine-grained control over it. As you start to sort of increase the percentage, that green hazelnut flavor gets a whole lot more prominent and little weird, definitely a little weird. My standard procedure for these testers is mixing up at 0.25%, 1%, and 3%. And the 1 and the 3% were not fun. that green hazelnut skin thing kind of picks up like a little bit of a gasoline edge. So it's definitely on the potent side. I'd go ahead and I'd keep it low. It also feels a little bit top heavy. Like I'm getting a really clear like hazelnut, like raw hazelnut top note. And that body isn't really keeping up with that. So I'd kind of use it accordingly. I'd use it for that hazelnut top note. I think that you could probably go ahead and sneak it into some tobaccos for like a raw hazelnut top note. I think it'd work really well there. I think also with how strong that top note is, if you wanted to go towards something more like a Nutella, but you already had like a really strong, heavy chocolate base you wanted to use, I think a very small percentage of this on top of that would go ahead and give you some of that hazelnut top note there. It's definitely interesting though. Again, you just want to make sure that you stay low with it. There's an interesting hazelnut flavor here, but for the love of God, do not even go close to 1% with it. So the last flavor I'm going to do today is their granola. So, really interesting flavor. Really interesting choice for a flavor, too. As far as I know, there's not really a good granola concentrate out there. And this is doing a really admirable job of trying to hit that. For me, it's a little bit more of like a darker homemade granola. Because I'm super clever, I've been calling it hippie grade granola. Because it doesn't have like that really sort of heavy like honey stickiness that you get with like some commercial granolas that are just doused in sugar. It feels like it has a darker cook to it than some of those flavors. And sort of as you increase the percentage, it just seems to get a little bit darker and darker. There is some sweetness here. It's not entirely bereft of sweetness, but it doesn't really feel like a commercial granola sweetness. It feels more like a homemade granola sweetness. I am getting like a really good like cooked or toasted oat note out of this, which is cool because it has some similarities with like a cereal note, but it's a little bit, I guess, richer and darker. It's really interesting. It actually manages to convey the granola thing pretty well. Um, there is like a little bit of fruitiness to this, which is really interesting. Um, it's pretty non-specific, but to me it tastes a lot like a lighter cherry flavor. And as you start to increase the percentage on this, you get like a hint of almond in there. So I'm thinking it has something to do with the cherry. At lower percentages, it's not particularly descript. I don't think you're going to have a hard time mixing around it. I think it's just like kind of like a launching pad to add another fruit in there, whether that's like strawberries or blueberries or whatever fruit you actually want with that granola. I don't think it's necessarily gonna clash with that fruitiness here. I do get just a little bit of chocolate on the tail end of this, especially at higher percentages, like a dark, kind of like a dry, dark cocoa note to it. But it doesn't really hit me up until you're to the percentages where those oats taste a little overcooked. I would probably be down on the lower end in terms of concentration here, just because that sort of cooked note gets darker as you start to increase the percentage. I'd be leaning more towards the 0.25 to 0.75% range. It doesn't have a whole lot of like crispy warmth to it. It definitely feels, again, like it's maybe just a little bit top heavy. So I feel like you could come in and bolster some of that up. Use this for sort of that identifiable granola top note, and then come back in with another source of AP to get some of the crispiness there. Personally, I'd probably recommend Cabela's Cereal 27, but I've been doing that a lot lately. Apparently, that's my that's my new go-to AP source for some of these flavors. I did do some testing with this and mixed it with Cap's Vanilla Whipped Cream and Flavor West Sweet Cream, and then I actually just got in some Chef's Devon Cream too, and I tried some really quick mixes. And the sort of benefit for this being as top heavy as it is it does sort of layer really well with those creams. So I think this is going to work for that kind of like yogurt parfait kind of vibe where you want distinct layers of like your cream or yogurt and then the granola. I think this is going to actually work really well in those kind of situations. So the other place I'd use this would be with like a cookie or a bakery that needs that sort of cooked oat note. I think you can go ahead and use this as sort of an accent percentage, and it's going to kind of like help distill your oatmeal raisin cookies or your cowboy cookies or whatever other bakery goods you can come up with that actually use a distinct oat component. I think that's going to sort of fit really well with a lower accent percentage of this concentrate. But on the whole, I think this one was my favorite out of this batch, just because, you know, despite some of the structural issues, I think it does do a really good job of sort of sitting apart from those creams, and I think it's going to be a really good springboard to actually making some pretty solid granola mixes. So yeah, thank you for watching. Like I said, this is video number 7. We got 2 more of these coming up, and then after that, I'm just going to be completely bereft of ideas and adrift in the other without any kind of direction or motivation. But until that point, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I will catch you later.